Hey, it's time for TV Skywriter. Good evening, or good morning, or afternoon, everybody, and welcome to TV Skywriter. I'm Pat Murray. I publish the Durham Skywriter, that's Durham, North Carolina's online community paper. And with TV Skywriter, I'd like to introduce you to people I think you should know. And that really goes for this gentleman, Sean Kosofsky. Now, I met Sean at Blueprint NC, right? You were my boss.
We worked together, yeah.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed working with you because I don't want to go on and on about Blueprint NC, but we were doing some good work with the seniors and, voting issues and media training and that sort of thing. So what have you done since then, if you don't mind? Just a very quick run through on what you've done, and then we'll talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so since Blueprint, where I was at from 2009 to 2014, where we worked predominantly on turning out underrepresented voters. That's single women, young voters, people of color in the state of North Carolina. Since then, I went off to lead an organization called Amplify, which was a polling and research organization. So our goal was to train nonprofit organizations how to use polling and research to benefit them. Most nonprofits don't test their messages. They don't do research to find out whether what they're saying works. So therefore, they're just spending a lot of resources communicating with their base based on a hunch. And so Amplify was created to really solve the problem of figuring out whether nonprofits were messaging correctly. And then I went off to New York for 3 years to lead the Tyler Clementi Foundation, which is a national, sophisticated sort of anti-bullying prevention and advocacy organization. So we had policies in Washington that we were advocating for, but also tactics that we were encouraging parents and teachers to implement at the local and state level. So the Tyler Clementi Foundation in New York is where I went off to New York to run for 3 years. And now I'm in San Francisco consulting. So past year, I've been helping nonprofits and political campaigns with fundraising, board development, and growing their political power. So if you're an organization and interested in that, my consulting practice works on that, but that's what I've been doing for the past year.
Awesome. Now, what you're running now is called Mind the Gap Consulting. And I have to ask you about the name because my sister visited London once, and she said, as you step off they don't call it the subway, what do they call it? The train, the tube, or whatever, they say mind the gap. So Is that where you got that from?
So I had visited London for the first time in 2002 or 2003. And I remember visiting London like it was yesterday. And I remember that the subway system was pretty impressive. And I remember that it was a cultural phenomenon in the city, that this thing that carried people from one place to another, that solved this daily problem for people, was the subway. But I had never lived in New York yet. I just had it was my first real experience in an international city for a while, experiencing the subway system. And I remember anytime you got on or off the train, this voice would come over the head system saying, mind the gap.
Mind the gap.
Mind the gap. It was this man's voice essentially saying, be careful. And there is a hole between where you stand and where you're going. And in that hole is danger. So you want to be mindful of that gap, that hole. So if you're going to go where you're going to go safely, you need to mind the gap. And for some reason, that, which has been a popular branding thing in London and in England and around the world, I always figured that my work trying to help nonprofits fill gaps and fix problems and plug holes in their programming, that Mind the Gap seemed to just make sense. So that's where Mind the Gap came from. Absolutely.
That's brilliant. That's actually absolutely brilliant. Now, I've been in media, I guess, for about 20 years or so. So that means I've seen and worked with many nonprofits. And I've seen them come and go, and sometimes go too easily. So I have to ask you, Sean, because you help nonprofits, I wonder if a lot of nonprofits are running off of passion. I mean, that's good. But I wonder sometimes if people start nonprofits because they feel really deeply about an issue, they want to help people. Sometimes people start nonprofits because something happened to their child or their parents or whatever.
Right.
And so they're filled with all this drive to help others, but they fail so easily sometimes. And I just wonder, um, is it what you do is to help them, how can I put more fuel in their cars, so to speak, other than just passion?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who start a small business fail, and a lot of people who start a small nonprofit fail. And part of the reason is that there is a incredible passion or interest or even incredibly talented skill set in one particular area. So someone says, I think I'm really good at this, and I think there's a market for this. And so therefore, I want to start a nonprofit. Most people, when they're starting a nonprofit, they don't think about how to fundraise for it. How is this going to be sustainable? When you're starting a business, it feels a little easier. Like, I just need to convince people to pay me for my service. In nonprofits, you need to convince people out of the goodness of their heart to say that your solution for the world matters and to give up money for no personal benefit, unlike a product. So when you're starting a business or if you're starting a nonprofit, I feel like there is a passion to solve a problem. And in nonprofits, I do believe that the passion only gets you so far.
Hmm.
I've been convinced that most people who start nonprofits could probably just start their nonprofit as a project of a larger nonprofit. But many decide to say, no, I want to do this on my own. I want to call my own shots. I don't want to be part of some larger entity. I want to run my own nonprofit. Totally fine. There's about 1 million nonprofits in the United States, and many of them are very, very small.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to start a nonprofit organization and you want to grow it to solve some particular problem or make a dent in some particular problem, it could be as small as your child's soccer league, or it could be a book club, or it could be trying to make sure that the local homeless shelter has enough resources to feed people or to care for people. But most people who start nonprofits don't really think through the business plan. They don't think through all of the details of making this sustainable. So yes, as a consultant, I try to help people think through how can you accomplish long-term success, growing this organization, solving problems, and thinking through what is the end state? What is the end place you want to be at? What does success look like? Most nonprofits don't think like that. They think, I just want to do good work in the world, and we'll just hope and pray and cross our fingers that people will give us money because we're doing good work and we're hugging trees and loving dogs and doing all of this great work. But really, it's a lot more tactical than that.
So, at what point in your experience does a nonprofit contact you? I'm very curious about that because, again, I see people operating. And of course, they thank their volunteers at their special events. Very often, you can have a nonprofit put on a special event and have 100 volunteers.
Right.
And that's very impressive. But sometimes you can think that could be short sighted because they're lucky they got 100 volunteers. Will that always happen?
Right.
Will they always be able to pull off everything that they try to accomplish? So, at what point do they call you, Sean, or write to you?
Folks call me at a lot of different points, but typically, because my specialty is young, small, and new organizations, people call me when they are thinking of starting a new nonprofit, or they've been operating for a long time, but they're still small, or they're early on in the process and they think we really need to take our organization to the next level. We think we have the right people on board. We think we have the right programs, but we need someone to help us take the programs to the next level. So in my mind, what happens is everyone who starts a nonprofit has a good idea in their head of what problem they're trying to solve. And they're probably almost universally all valuable. But the problem becomes, how do you work on sustainability? Most nonprofits don't have a key funder on the board who's going to pull the trigger every year and make sure that their bills are met. Mm-hmm. So organizations will call me to say, okay, we need to build a great board. We're still young and new, or our whole board has left us. So normally it's organizations experiencing change, or it is organizations who are new, young, or startup. And they call me. And so some of the larger organizations that call, they will call because they have decided to step into advocacy, policy change, trying to pass laws, or they want to step up their fundraising. So those are the two different areas where folks will normally call me is how do we step up our fundraising capacity? How do we develop our board? Or how do we take our small emerging organization and make it more sophisticated?
Let me put a question to you, if you don't mind, Sean, because you're talking about building a board. I have personally seen nonprofits where the board members don't jump in to help and they leave it to the passion filled leader slash executive director to do everything to the point of failure.
Right.
So give us, if you don't mind, I'm not paying you to consult right now, but if you don't mind, give us 3 pointers on how to identify useful board members.
Boards, so here's the first one. Boards under state law own the organization. So when a board, in nonprofits, the board is the legal entity that runs the nonprofit, not the executive director. So when a board owns an organization, they have responsibilities. They have a duty of obedience, a duty of care, and a duty of loyalty. Those three key responsibilities under federal law and state law are mandatory. A board can't pass a budget to raise and spend a certain amount of money if they don't help. A board can't hire an executive director if they can't promise to pay that executive director. So the very first thing that a board needs to do if it's going to become an organization and actually do good work in the world is it needs to get clear about its own legal and ethical responsibilities. One of the fundamental problems in nonprofits is that boards are volunteers and they don't work there. They don't work there. These are all people with probably full-time jobs. They work somewhere else. And then they gather once a month and vote on the livelihood of this executive director or the staff of a nonprofit where they don't even work. It's a very weird situation. So the first thing I would say is that a board needs to understand that its legal responsibility is to get insurance, to minimize risk, and to pay their staff, and to raise a certain amount of money every single year. The second thing a board could definitely do is get alignment. Too often, everyone on the board came there for different reasons. And that's fine. Some people are there to boost their resume. Some people are there because they love the work. Some people are there because they're extroverts. Some people are there because they really want to solve a particular social problem. But unless the whole board gets alignment on what they are all there to solve, that's going to be a big problem. If the whole board decides that discrimination is wrong and we're going to end discrimination in our state, that's one thing. If a board decides that they're going to get together and solve homelessness or they're going to address some kind of big social issue in their community, they need to do that and focus on some local problem in a given window of time. But if the board doesn't have alignment, if the whole board doesn't say, yes, this is our mission, yes, this is the mixture of programs that we're going to pursue, and yes, this is our vision, you're going to have huge problems. So those are two issues. The third issue is getting clarity on rules. This is one of the biggest issues. If there's no staff and there's just a board, the board chair, the officers, and then the general board need to all be very, very clear about what their roles are and what their roles are not. And so if you decide to hire staff, that gets even more complicated. So if a board decides to hire an executive director, then they need to make sure that the executive director is there to operationalize and execute day-to-day tasks. The board is there to set policy and to think about the 3, 5, and 20-year vision of the organization. The board does not get to micromanage at all. That is where a lot of organizations go wrong. Board members who are overzealous or they care too much and they intrude on what the executive director is doing at the day-to-day level. Those are the three things that I would say if you're thinking of starting a nonprofit or if you are running a nonprofit that you must address. Most nonprofits, if they can get clear on alignment and they can get clear on board roles and they can get clear on these fundamental questions, they will do well.
You know, the one organization that caused me to ask this question might have been doing it backwards, because what I was trying to describe to you was a situation where the organization was started by someone who was very passionate and chose people that she knew to serve on her board. So that's probably backwards, but I'll bet it's common.
Most people who start a nonprofit They are eager. The way the law works, you have to quickly grab a board and tell the government who your board is. So because of the urgency of creating a board, people who are starting a nonprofit just grab the people close to them, friends and family. And most of us hang out with people who look just like ourselves. So if you're white and you're starting a nonprofit, most of the people around you are going to be white. If you're black, most of the people around you are going to be black. If you're gay, and so on. So there tends to be a little bit of groupthink and a little bit of like insular thinking. So most nonprofits are started by people who gather the people close to them just to get off and running. So yes, just rounding up people near you without any sophisticated training or orientation or thought into what a board is supposed to do. It's one of the greatest failings that we have in the creation of nonprofits in our country is that we don't provide training before you start a nonprofit. All we do is teach you how to file the forms, not to actually run the place. And
Right.
many of our nonprofits would be better served if they knew that if you're trying to change the world, you need high-performing people, not just your friends and family.
Now, I have two questions for you. So, the training part, is that something that you provide as a consultant? Is that what you do? You realize that these people aren't really well versed in what they need to know, and thus you provide the training, or 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 am I reading too much into what you do?
I think that's right. So for 26 years, I've been in nonprofits and I've been leading them for 10. I've been the executive director of 4 separate nonprofits and soon probably a 5th nonprofit. But my master's program was in running nonprofit organizations. So training is a core part of what I do. And that is, I don't want to teach people how to fundraise. I want to help ensure their success long term in fundraising. I am more of a teach a person to fish than give them the fish kind of person. So training is a huge part of what we do. One of my courses is the Executive Director Bootcamp. So if you just go to mindthegapconsulting.org, you can learn more about the fundraising training. I offer coaching, consulting, and training. So training is a big part of it. But there's a very formal course. For about $250, you can go through a comprehensive course on learning what it is that a nonprofit executive director is supposed to do.
Nice.
So it is in some ways overwhelming when you take the course because you're like, wow, there's a lot that's in my responsibility, but you also get to delegate most of it, which is great. So the board and the ED work together to create the organization. So I do offer training on fundraising, building boards, just about any area of nonprofit management I offer training in. I'm a generalist, so I offer training in all sorts of areas. But fundraising, board development, and executive director management is a few of the areas where I focus on. But yes, training is absolutely part of what we do.
Excellent. Do you think that there is some way for people to test the waters before actually forming a nonprofit? Because that is a huge endeavor. And sometimes I get, I don't want to be negative, but sometimes I do get the sense with certain nonprofits that they're really creating their own job, but not really doing as
nonprofits
much.
are so small they can't even afford to pay themselves. I don't know if they're creating their own job as much as they are creating their own vanity project. I want to be in charge. I want this thing to be solved. They don't even think about whether someone else is doing it and whether they should collaborate. They just want, because of an entrepreneurial spirit, to go solve a problem their own way. I totally get it. So I do think some nonprofits do think about the profit motive, which is like, wow, if I could get this organization strong enough, I could leave my job and make this my full-time work. I think that's actually aspirational and wonderful that you could probably make less money, but doing work where every single day you find joy, I think that that's fine. Most nonprofits probably don't need full-time salary staff, but many of them do. But if you want to leave your job or if you want to run a nonprofit organization, I do believe in being paid well. I actually am a big believer that we pay people so poorly in nonprofits that it discourages a lot of people from leaving their private sector jobs to lead our nonprofits. Everyone is falling all over themselves to prove that their overhead costs are low. The truth is that unless you pay for overhead, people, I hate that term overhead, unless you convince people that salary and office supplies and rent and all these things that are necessary are part of running programs, we're going to fail. So donors and the public need to become more sophisticated in agreeing to pay for all the stuff that goes into running a program, not just the program. We end up short-circuiting and undercutting our nonprofit organizations by insisting that every single penny can't go to staff or can't go to advertising. I think that's a mistake. So yes, so in many ways, I understand where you're going, and many people have the same question.
Yeah, I'd like to see them, as a media person, I like to see nonprofits survive and thrive, because very often they are doing very, very good work. Now, again, as a media person, I have to say, I caught that last part you were saying, where not every penny, where people think that you shouldn't spend anything on the organization. But what really discourages me sometimes when I see nonprofits do good work is when I realize that they don't understand that they need help with getting the word out. I see so many people, and again, this might be self serving because I'm a media person, and I apologize, but what I really hate is when people work so very hard to solve whatever problem they're solving and then forget to involve the media so that we can tell people to join in, to give, to come out to the event, et cetera, et cetera. What would you tell a nonprofit, um, how can I put this, to help them? Because to me, getting the word out is helping them to survive and to bring in more volunteers and to bring more interest to their cause.
I
So,
think
what would you tell a nonprofit that needs help in that area?
all of them need help in this area. Nonprofits don't tell their story well. Companies don't tell their story well. Most people don't tell their story well. I think nonprofits are so careful to not waste a dollar. They think that hiring someone to help them with PR or marketing or advertising or communications is not valuable. Most funders and foundations don't pay for this. This is a surprise to a lot of people. Most foundations don't want to pay for communications. I think most nonprofits need, especially if they're doing really, really good work. There are some nonprofits that are just doing work that's cute and fuzzy wuzzy, and they're trading books in their local library. But then there are groups that are really trying to change the world. And if you're trying to change the world and you need more and more people to know what it is you're doing, you must engage the media. You need to put out press releases. You need to be trained. You need to understand how to get out your message in under 4.6 seconds. You need to understand how to take a complicated thing and make it simple. If we So I do think that nonprofit organizations need to be aggressive in getting out free and earned media. You should be pitching newsrooms, talking to newsrooms, getting out free coverage of your issues. And that might be talking to podcasts or local community papers or whoever. But nonprofit organizations are so focused on doing great work, they forget to tell the world and their donors and the public about the work that they're doing. It is a frustrating thing in nonprofits that we're doing such great work. And we're too busy sometimes telling people about the statistics and facts and data instead of the stories of the people that we serve. So thank you for being someone who likes to get the story out, get the message out, and educate people about what's happening in our larger community, because I think that that is exactly what's needed.
Is extremely important. In fact, I'm not going to let people know where I got this sheet of paper from them reading, but there's a list of people that this particular local nonprofit wanted to engage. And that is, I'm going to leave out some of these items because you'll be able to guess if you're local who I'm talking about. But they're talking about certain agencies, certain demographics, community leaders, businesses, first responders, faith community, local government, neighborhoods, schools. And I said, where's the media?
Right.
Because who's going to tell everybody what you're doing? And they were like, oh, yeah. And just to let you know, if you're a nonprofit agency, you don't pay for media promotion. I shouldn't say promotion, but you don't pay for interviews. You pay for display ads. That's the only thing. You don't pay for the story that's written in the paper. You don't pay for the interview that is done live or edited or whatever, or on the radio or TV. That's all free. Use it.
Right. I agree.
So is that part of your training as well, Sean?
Yeah, I do train people on how to use the media. I have a 6-hour training, which is pretty much a full day training on everything from being opportunistic, like finding ways to get your organization into the media, building relationships with newsrooms and media leaders, to also sound bites and pitching and explaining your organization's story. So, crisis communications, organizational nonprofit storytelling, these are all things I do help nonprofits with in the media. So, yeah, absolutely. That is one of the things. I've done a lot of work with the press in my life, so I could help organizations think through these challenges and get way more people interested in their work than if they're not engaging the media.
That's very important. If you don't mind, Sean, I'd like to ask you about longevity. I'm wondering if most nonprofits, I honestly don't know this answer. I'd like to know if you think that most nonprofits survive their founder. I'm curious about that because there is a nonprofit, and I will say their name, the Family Resource Center on Disabilities, that's in Chicago, started as women around a kitchen table. They wanted to make sure that their kids who had disabilities got everything that they deserved or had coming in terms of education, et cetera, et cetera. And the organization has been in business probably for 30 years, perhaps. And they have a different executive director, so obviously they survived their founder. I don't know if that's rare. Can you tell me if that is rare, Sean?
I don't know if the majority of nonprofits survive their founder, but I think most do. Um, I don't know if most organizations who lose their founder are able to hire another one,
Hmm.
but I do think that founders are amazing. They have all of this energy, and they clearly were able to galvanize enough people to build a board and create a nonprofit. Very entrepreneurial. But a good founder thinks about the organization's future beyond themselves.
Hmm.
And some of them are not, some of them are too short sighted. Too many of them are focused on their own ego. Too many of them are so focused on the work that they just don't think about longevity and transition and the health of the organization. We need to help our organizational founders and nonprofits think through transition. What happens when an organization experiences change? A new board founder, a new board chair, a new executive director. We need to help organizations think through that. So I don't know if a majority can survive their founder. I think most do. But I do think that whoever comes in right after the founder is in for a real challenge.
Hmm.
The board is almost always going to compare the new person to the founder. And so a lot of organizations will hire an interim or bring in someone who's going to lead them in an interim basis, because that way that person takes the brunt of all the dysfunction and all the personality and all the emotion. And then they bring on someone who's more of the permanent board leader or staff leader, because the founder is so charismatic, it's hard to replace them.
Wow. Now, Sean, you're extraordinarily detailed and thorough and knowledgeable. And that makes me ask this next question, and that is, do you have different levels of training and consultation, or do you actually do the hand holding and take them from one level to the next?
So we do coaching, which is very much hands-on. So if an executive director or a board chair or someone leaving the private sector who wants to go into the nonprofit sector for the first time needs coaching on how to do a career change, that is very hands-on. Consulting is a little bit more removed, and it is helping the organization with tools and training and downloads and the proper resources and conversations.
I'm glad you said that. I hate to interrupt because I actually thought coaching and consulting were the same thing. So thank you.
Yeah, consulting is helping with expertise, and coaching is more helping someone realize the answers lie within themselves and asking lots of questions and helping them realize that they already have the training and the wisdom to solve their own problems. So keeping someone, having someone to keep them on track, having someone to ask them tough questions, having them challenge their values and morals and standing and programmatic decisions. So coaching is more of a helping someone realize their full potential, and consulting is someone who comes in and says, here's the answer. And in coaching, you're not supposed to give someone the answer. You're supposed to help them find the answer within themselves.
Wow, that's a
Then,
huge difference.
yeah, huge difference. And then in training, you could have 1 or 20 or 50 or 5,000 people learning from a standard curriculum. And so I can help organizations with a 101, 201, or much more advanced level of training on fundraising, board development, best practices, compliance, legal, or other issues within a nonprofit. So yes, if your nonprofit is struggling with media or communications, pretty much anything, I can help out. Being in nonprofits for 26 years and running 4 of them, I've done it all. So I can help organizations with most things. If I don't know how to do it, I'll refer you on to some other consultant who can. But yeah, absolutely. Training can be scaled between experience and region of the country.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you for your contact information after this last question, because I know you want to get back. You are visiting after all, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I'm just curious. A lot of people have been in a certain industry for a couple of decades or a few decades, and they're done. And I'm wondering, why do you like nonprofits so much? What drives you?
Oh my God. I think that being a gay man, that the experience of being in the closet when I was a teenager was so painful and so difficult and so challenging that I have dedicated my life to making sure that people don't suffer in silence. I suffered in silence through all of my teen years.
Wow.
Whether you're going through bullying, whether you're enduring an unwanted pregnancy, whether you are someone who can't speak for yourself, like the environment, civil rights, these are things that can't speak for themselves. They need someone to speak for them. I've always believed that the most vulnerable populations are probably suffering in silence and that no one is looking out for them. So those of us who have decided that we have lived our lives in a way that was painful, we should try to lift other people out of pain. I want to end suffering. And as a gay man, as someone who has seen racism and homophobia and sexism and all of these things happening in my daily life, I need to get other people to change their way of life. I needed to change the law. I needed to change attitudes. I needed to change it all. So the reason why I'm committed to nonprofit organizing is that I've never found a way to make a profit in a way that is also making change. There are organizations trying to do that, but I believe that every single day I want to go to work, turn the key, flip on the coffee, and battle injustice. If I'm not paid as much as I could be paid elsewhere, I don't care. I want every day to go home knowing I made a dent in the universe that day.
I love that. I love that so much. Okay, Sean Kosofsky. So tell us what your contact info, and actually, are you restricted to helping people in Northern or California, San Francisco area, or are you able to?
People all over the country, and I've even helped a couple of people in other countries. Canada, and I have a couple of clients right now from Africa who are reaching out about fundraising projects in Kenya and in other countries. I don't know the laws in every country, but I can certainly help people with strategy. So the best way to reach me is through my website, mindthegapconsulting.org. If you just look up Mind the Gap, you'll find a million different things, but mindthegapconsulting.org. And you'll find my practice, you'll find me, and you'll have my social media platforms, my email address, every way of reaching me, and that is the best way to reach me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean Kosofsky, for being on this show. Very nice talking with you again and seeing you again. It's been a few years.
It has been a few years. I'm so excited to have had you invite me. So thank you so much for all your great work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, folks, if you are a nonprofit, definitely look up mindthegapconsulting.org and see what you can do about your organization. And with that, don't forget to read Durham, North Carolina's online community paper, the Durham Skywriter. That's durhamskywriter.com. Even if you're not in Durham and you just want to see what an all-positive newspaper could possibly look like, check it out. So with that, have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time. Ciao for now.
Thank you.